Hi everyone and welcome. We're in my wormery and today I've got some bins that need to be fed. It's been about a week since I last fed these 4 bins here, but before we do that, I wanted to take a check-in on my finishing tubs. By finishing tubs I'm referring to, I guess, basically that are holding finished compost or material that I consider as finished compost. And all I'm really trying to do at this point is bait out any remaining worms that might still be in the material. Last time we checked in on this bin, we pretty much determined that there was no more need for any sort of baiting of worms because there were really no worms to be found. However, in these last 2 tubs, it did seem to appear like there were some worms remaining. So we wrapped some, I think it was banana peel, into some newspaper, and we placed that down into the material in the hopes that that might round up the remainder of the worms in the material. So we're going to check these now, and we're going to take a look to see if those bait bombs are full of worms, in the hopes that they are, and then look through the rest of the material, and hopefully there'll be no more worms remaining in the material, and then we can consider these tubs as having just finished compost in them. So we're going to take a quick peek at these to see how they're coming along, and keeping my fingers crossed. Let's hope that they're done. It'd be nice to consider all the material in these 3 tubs as finished vermicompost. Okay, so now the one thing we usually find in this first of the tubs we're looking at is lots of sprouts always popping up, trying to grow out of the material. I guess number one, because the material itself is just such a rich, organic growing medium that I guess the sprouts just can't seem to resist. But I guess more importantly, the reason being that I allowed a whole bunch of seeds to wind up in my compost, and well, what do seeds do? It's perfectly normal for them to be wanting to do this, so the lesson to be learned from this is to try to minimize or completely exclude any seeds from getting into your compost bins. So we might bump into another sprout here or there, but I think we got the majority of them. The bait bomb that we had put in here 10 days ago was right in the middle. So if we start peeling things back, we can already see some signs of it. So here you can already see a worm or 2. I see one hanging out within the bait bomb and another one here on top of it. The trick here is going to be to extract the bait bomb without allowing it to fall apart. And then ultimately, since we are extracting worms, I'm going to want to place this bait bomb and the newspaper right into another of my active bins. And since I'm already a week since my last feeding of my normal bins, I'm just going to go ahead and set these bait bombs aside, as well as the worms that they've rounded up, and introduce them into one of my active vermicomposting bins. So we'll just use this little tray to hang on to our bait bomb after we pull it out. So I'm going to try to get a good grip underneath it. Try to leave behind as much of the compost as I can. And place it gently into here. Because we'll see if we can bring along as many worms as possible, since baiting of the worms was our main objective here after all, wasn't it? Let's see if we can pull a couple of these little guys out while we're at it. Okay. It does seem like the bait bomb was kind of doing a good job, because all around the perimeter of where the bait bomb was just removed from, there are worms hanging out. So my hope is that there's not just worms hanging out everywhere in the bin, and that they're just really concentrated in the area where the bait bomb was. Now, I think just from picking around here a little bit, it does seem impractical to think that I'm going to be able to just fish all of these little guys out of here one by one. So I believe that at least on this bin, it's fair to assume that we can probably go through one more round of trying to bait out some more of these worms, because there's still quite a few of them in here from what I can tell. we could go through maybe another round of trying to fish some of these worms out using another bait bomb. So why don't we do that? I have some newspaper standing by, as well as some stuff that I bought down from upstairs from out of the freezer. So we'll rig up another bait bomb, place it back in here, down in the middle again where the one that we just extracted was located, and hopefully we'll be able to fish out a whole bunch of additional worms in the process. So let me grab a piece of newspaper and some bait food, and we'll deploy a new bait bomb right into here. Okay, so now what I have here is just a piece of newspaper. And what I did was I took a knife and I did puncture it in a number of places. So there are little holes in it throughout, just so that getting in there for the worms is easy enough to do. So I'm gonna just plop in a few scrumptious pieces of food items, in this case watermelon rinds. And I think I'm just gonna also drop in a little bit of coffee grinds. Watermelon rinds and coffee grinds. As long as they rhyme, they should work well together, right? I'm making that up. Okay. So, after that, all I'm going to do is roll it up into a nice little ball. And we're going to just drop it down into the hole. Alright, let's try it this way. Pretty straightforward. So now all I'm going to do is move the vermicompost back in from the edge. Go ahead and level things off for the most part. And we're going to go ahead and give this maybe another 7 or 10 days like we just did. We'll see how that goes. I don't have any real immediate need for this vermicompost, so just kind of using this as an opportunity to see how bait bombs like this might work. So a little bit of a test. All right, let's do the same to the other bin. Some finishing tub. You could tell just from looking at it, it's a little different. It doesn't have any sprouts popping out in it, even though it probably could, since there do seem to be a fair number of straggler seeds here and there throughout the bin. It's not to say that we're not going to find any sprouts, but if we were going to find some, I'm sure we would have seen them by now. I guess the other thing, I'm not sure if it's visible on the camera, but I can tell just from touching it, the material is a little bit more dry than the material that we saw in the tub that we just extracted the bait bomb from. So a couple distinct notable differences right off the bat, just from the initial glance. And just to recap the last visit to this tub, or to both of these tubs when we deployed these bait bombs, we did sort of notice that this tub probably did not have nearly as many worms as the other one. So if you remember the bin that we just extracted the first bait bomb out of, the first tub had worms hanging out around near the bait bomb. But here, I'm not seeing any. I haven't seen even one so far. So I'm beginning to wonder if this tub might actually be finished at this point. It'd be nice if it were, because then we could really just leave only one of the two tubs up on the shelf to continue rounding up the last of the worms. So let's just go ahead and extract this bait bomb too. Still don't see any worms, even though we did eventually spot a couple worms in this material last time we were in here, and that was the reason we ended up deploying the bait bomb. Right now I cannot say that I see any. For the most part, I think it's fair to say that this tub is done too. So we're gradually getting there. we've now got 2 tubs that are done in terms of finishing the vermicompost off for use. So we'll just set this one aside as well and label this as complete, and we'll just pop in on that other one in another 7 or 10 days, and we'll hope that maybe at some point soon we can consider that one as finished as well. All right, very nice. That makes 2. 2 of the 3 tubs are now truly finished as far as vermicomposting is concerned. All right, so let's get rid of this tub, and next comes the feedings. Let's get down into these bins and give them some food. Stuff to go into the bins today is, besides these bait bombs that have worms in them, and a little bit of paper used, for bedding. We could use that as a little bit of extra bedding for the bins. Got some Brussels sprouts, presumably Brussels sprouts that have gone bad in the refrigerator because most of them look a little nasty. Here's a whole bunch of cabbage. There's some red cabbage, some green cabbage, and I guess down here we've got asparagus, bits and pieces of asparagus. So some carrot peels, some other little things down here, but it's pretty generous feeding this time, so we're gonna have to make it all fit. Yeah, I think the worms are gonna like it. It's gonna be a nice hearty feeding, so they'll have plenty of food to chow down on over the next few weeks. So, all right, let's give it to them. What is this? This is something I usually don't see. I believe these are mites. Little red mites. Huh. It's pretty interesting. Okay. So a couple other creatures that make their way into your bins sometimes are these little roly-polies. Ones that when you touch them they curl up into a round ball, but it looks like the mites are huddled all over the back side of one of these little roly-polies. And then another type of insect that I guess is pretty busy this time of year is a beetle. And here's another instance of where these mites are just swarming all over this beetle. I guess they're pretty aggressive. Pretty aggressive, these mites. So I don't know. I think I might open the window and see if I could shake some of these little guys off and leave them outside. So I don't know if I want them in my bin. It's not the sort of thing I see every day. Usually don't see mites in my bins, so I'd rather not have them in there. So why don't I do that really quick? This poor little beetle must really be suffering with these mites going nuts on him. Maybe he'll have a chance to shake them off outside, so we'll send him outdoors with the mites as well. I left that piece of newspaper outside in the sun so that hopefully the mites will be repelled by the heat and the brightness, and hopefully we can just use that piece of paper and cover up with it later after we're done. But for now I'm going to leave it out there, and hopefully the mites will be gone by the time we need it again in a few minutes. So here too, like we normally see, we got a couple sprouts popping up. Not a big deal. They don't seem to be quite as numerous as we've seen in the past, because there's always little tiny, very small castings right above my latest feeding zone. So even if the feeding zone marker weren't there, I think I'd recognize that as the feeding zone. Just trying to collect any other little bits of food that I'm able to locate here on the surface, pile them up, so that when we populate when we feed and put food down into the feeding zone, we'll also take all this small particulate matter and drop it down in there as well. Alright, so I'm gonna start peeling back some of this compost. I can already see some signs of the previous feeding. The last feeding was a week ago, 7 days now. and can't really recall what it was that they received. Oh, that was a piece of corn. Okay, it's coming back to me now. Wow, was that a week ago already? Time flies. So the idea here was to give them slow composting food items. And by doing so, those slow composting food items, like this piece of corn, would be very easy to separate from the compost and make it just that much easier to harvest the bin. The only other stuff that I believe we had placed in here alongside this was some sort of a bedding material, whatever it might have been. I don't recall what it was. And any other food scraps that we were able to collect off the upper surface last go around. So I think we're seeing some pretty good progress here. I think watching the corn dissipate at a fairly slow pace is normal, completely normal, because corn always does seem to take a little while. But to see nothing else around the feeding zone is pretty good. That's pretty much what we were after, I believe. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to replenish the food supply, but I think what we're also going to do is we're probably going to deploy these bait bombs here. Because this way the newspaper that's already here can serve as the bedding material to be right beneath the feeding zone. And not only that, we'll get a chance to see how these bait bombs worked, so we can actually take a peek inside and see how many worms we were able to lure out of the finished compost. Alright, so let's just take all this other stuff that's really going to become worm food anyway and drop it in here too. I think we've got everyone. There's one little tiny guy over here. Pretty good. So we'll just end up using this paper as the interesting. We're just going to use this paper as the bedding for the feeding zone over here. Just some coffee. It's very dry in here, so strange. I don't know why. And I don't see any worms either, for that matter. The banana peel is here. Huh. I really did expect to see at least a few worms hanging out inside this bait bomb, but it is so dry, I'm not surprised to not have any worms in it. Huh. Well, whatever. I guess the bottom line is that the tub that we removed it from was done. There were no worms in it, so I'm considering that as a finished, complete tub of vermicompost. However, in this bait bomb, I believe we're going to have slightly different results. Yep, look at that. This bait bomb is chock full of worms. And that kind of makes sense, because the bin that we removed this from did have a fair number of worms in it. But I didn't expect to see that big of a difference between the two. Just interesting to see how dry the coffee is in these. So that's cool. We were able to convince a number of worms to move out of the compost and into this little bait bomb, so we can keep them in our worm colony and separate them from our finished compost. So cool. Alright, so once again I'm going to see if I could pick out any larger food scraps. This seems to be a little piece of a banana stem. See if there's any other larger food items hanging out in here. Probably not going to see many. This might be part of a banana peel as well. So the only other thing we wanted to put down into the feeding zone was this collected particulate matter off the top surface. And I think just to keep things moving along in this bin, just to make sure that the food supply doesn't get too depleted, even though it doesn't seem like there's a chance of that happening. It seems like we've already got a fair amount of stuff over here on the side. I do want to use some of this food that we just checked out over here, so why don't we give them a nice hunk of cabbage right there. couple pieces of asparagus, a little bit of the purple cabbage, maybe a couple of these Brussels sprouts. Now that's a fairly generous feeding. Seems to contradict my idea of trying to wind this bin down, which was my theme for feeding this bin last time. But whatever. Seems like we've got enough worms in here to handle it, so we'll just cut them loose and let them go. And hopefully they'll chow down on it big time. Alright, so I'm just going to start moving the compost back over towards the feeding zone so we can cover up with it. I think we're in pretty good shape. So we'll just cover up over here a little bit. And level off the rest. Alright. Let's get this thing covered up. I'll just go grab that piece of newspaper from outside. See any signs of the mites, so I wonder how that actually came to be. Hopefully we don't see much of that in the future, but I guess only time will tell. Alright, let's get the next oldest bin out here. Now this bin doesn't seem to be exhibiting that mite infestation problem, which is surprising because it was right next to the other bin on the shelf. So it makes me wonder how that happened. It's interesting. We had taken a similar approach, was that we had tried to handle both of the oldest tubs, or both oldest bins, in a similar fashion by trying to gather any sort of small particulate matter resting on the upper surface so that it can be added to the feeding zone. I believe it was in this bin that we had a fairly large amount of newspaper as bedding. And that was the other reason I wanted to include those bait bombs in the newspaper that the bait bombs were wrapped in that oldest bin of mine, because I believe that this one already has a fair amount of bedding left over. At least last week it did. So I'm expecting to still see a fair amount of that newspaper in here still. So I'll be curious to see how this is progressing from that point of view. Start pushing things aside here. You'll notice we took a similar approach with the piece of corn in here as the slow composting item to be placed in here. So we're just going to kind of keep that there as we peel back some more of the material in the feeding zone. There's all kinds of little hunks of food all over the place. Hopefully I didn't go spreading too much of those food items up in this pile here. This must be a banana peel stem. Some sticks and whatnot. Alright, I'm just going to move this aside briefly just so we can take a peek at what's happening in here. Yeah, see? Still got a fair amount of this newspaper that was in here from last time. So that's good. I anticipated that being there. So that'll act as pretty good bedding for our next feeding. We won't have to add any bedding to this one. We're just going to leave that newspaper right where it is. And let's just go ahead and put this piece of corn back where it was as well. But on top of that bedding material, I'm going to take some of this particulate matter that we collected off the top surface and drop it down into the feeding zone. Give it a chance at being consumed instead of just being left on the top of the surface. Okay. And then we'll throw in another heap of nice, fast composting soft materials. Once again, they'll get a bunch of asparagus, a little bit of purple cabbage as well. Very similar feedings happening here for both of these bins. That's a big Brussels sprout. Looks terrible. No wonder it's compostable. Must have gotten somehow slipped into the back of the refrigerator and forgotten about. So that's what's becoming worm food now, instead of being consumed as human food. Okay. Here again, I think we've given them a nice big load of food, but it's all stuff that's soft and should be eaten up pretty quickly. No slow composting items in there other than that piece of corn. Alright, so let's start shoving stuff back over. And at the same time, we could take a peek over on this side too at how things are looking. Very densely populated bin, as was the first one we looked at. Both of these oldest bins of mine are very heavily populated. I think that's the reason I don't see all the worms in the feeding zone. I just see them scattered all over the place because there's just so many worms in the bin. Alright, let's just cover up here as well. Oh, you know what? I don't remember. Did we add coffee to the first one? I have this tendency to forget coffee. I can't remember, but since it just occurred to me, we'll give this one some. Hopefully we gave the last bin some too. I just don't remember now. Get this one back up on the shelf and we'll get down to the last two bins. The last two bins being my newest bins. And they're really not new anymore. I mean, ooh, look at this. I guess we do have mites. Except they're on the cardboard. I'm not sure how I missed that. Maybe I just peeled it off so quickly that I just overlooked it. So, what do I do here? I guess I'm going to try to shake them off. If you could see them here, they're just crawling all over the place. So yeah, I'm going to shake these off really quick. Alright, I think I got the majority of them. I don't know where they came from, they just suddenly appeared. So weird. Alright, so something to keep an eye on going forward, I suppose. Mites. Who would have thunk? Alright, onward. Alrighty, so I wonder if we're going to see mites here. I don't think I see any on the cardboard. Just letting you guys bear witness. There's one thing interesting here though is well, maybe there are mites. I think I see little things moving around here. Yeah. I wonder if they're the ones that ripped through this newspaper. Interesting. Huh. I think rather than just leave this here, I'm going to put this back. I'm going to open the window and put this outside as well like we did earlier. Okay, so this is, this being a slightly newer bin, it's still being fed down the middle. And you know, I could have sworn we had put a new feeding zone marker in on some of these. But there's like, if this was it, then there must be something going on. They must really like the taste of the paper or something, but whatever. I just grabbed another one, I suppose, and we'll put that on top. And if it gets chewed up like this one did, as quickly as it did, then I might have to start thinking about using a different material for feeding zone indicator. This is a new type of coffee filter, purchased the white type most recently rather than the brown type. I don't know, maybe I just really like that one for some reason. Alright, I'm going to just peel things off to the edge here. I'm going to start taking a little gander here. This is a stem of a bunch of bananas. piece of corn. Yeah, you know, let me just make a pile over here that I can start setting this stuff aside, and then we'll plop it back down into the middle when we're ready. Guess I might as well get rid of these sprouts over here. Turn them into worm food. Is this a sprout here too? Not sure. This here is the cork. The silly cork that we just keep bumping into. I keep wondering if it's going to be removed one of these days. Here we got some mango pits that are really coming along good now. Really getting broken down significantly. I think that's what this hard stuff is. It's once the outer shell of the mango pit is gone, sometimes the seed is still there, and there's oh wow, it just feels like a hard chunk of something. It usually breaks pretty easily. It's usually pretty brittle. I don't know if this is part of like a chestnut or something. This is interesting how this is so clean, this mango pit. Totally getting eaten from the inside out. Alright, let's see if we can just get most of these large food chunks off to the side. So we can make a little bit of room for the next feeding. I believe what I did in these bins here is, I think I dropped a bunch of leaves down into the middle to make it into a more comfortable feeding zone for them. So I'm just wondering how many of those leaves we're going to still see down in here. There's some signs of it here and there. Certainly not much. Must be a pretty popular item, just the leaves down in the feeding zone. So I sometimes expect that I might see some signs of it remaining as bedding, but I only see tiny, tiny scraps of it here and there. Most of it appears to have been consumed. So I'm assuming it gets eaten up just like the rest of the food does. The only reason I can tell it's still leaves is because of the little leaf stems. That will get eaten up as well, but just that when I see a fair concentration of the leaf stems, I know that I've hit a spot where there used to be a lot of leaves laid down, but all the leaf material is gone. It's just the little leaf stems remain. Okay, you know, it's looking pretty good. So, I've got a fairly large amount of food remaining here. So, and it seems like we've got a pretty capable bunch on our hands. Nice, capable bunch of worms hanging out in this bin. So I got a feeling we're going to give this bin a nice, heavy-duty feeding. I'm going to move as many of our little worm friends off to the side as I can. Get them out of the middle. Alrighty. I went ahead and I bought a box of leaves in from outside. We'll lay down a little bit of fresh bedding for them down in the feeding zone. Like so. And you know, as long as I'm at it, I've got some paper here too. I might as well just toss this in. I was going to create a new bait bomb, thinking that I was going to need to deploy a second one, but it doesn't seem that that was necessary, so I've got this extra paper laying around. We'll just use this paper and leaves as bedding for these last two bins. Alrighty. There's a big wad of cabbage. More chunks of cabbage. A whole bunch of it. Some carrots and some of the purple cabbage. Getting some of this asparagus in here too. And we'll use Another handful of these Brussels sprouts and whatnot. Then I think we can start laying in some of this old food that was already in here. I'll put that cork right in the middle again, like I always do. Keep tempting myself just to get rid of it already one of these days. I wonder when that might happen. What would be even more surprising would be if we actually started to see some progress on that thing. Be interesting to see some worms finally starting to eat it. Alright. The past few times I've been adding grit, eggshell grit, so this time I just didn't bother. I think that should be fine. Not corn. Spread some of this used coffee on top. And I think it's safe to start covering this feeding zone right back up. Maybe jostle some of the material surrounding it around. Kind of aerate things over here on the edges. Oh, this is all the worms. I forgot I had put all the worms over here. Alright, well, they'll find their way into the feeding zone soon enough. Plenty of food. Alrighty, well, let's try to level things off here a little bit, and I think we'll be in good shape. I'm gonna go fetch that piece of newspaper from outside so we can cover up, and I guess we'll have to keep an eye on this bin as well, see if those mites return. I wonder what's causing them to show up in the first place. Alright, one more bin. Alright, are we going to see mites here too? I hope not. I don't see, you know, I see them. There they are. Maybe not quite as many, or maybe I'm just not seeing them. Yeah, they're there. Alright, well, let's put this one outside again, just like we did before. I'll shake it off again. Yeah, I think this was one of the nice new feeding zone indicators we deployed maybe a week or two ago, and they're really ripping through it. So it must be something about the material that it's made out of that's really appealing to the worms. Because I've never seen that before, at least not with the brown filters. It must be something about the paper that these white filters are made out of that they like. Alrighty. So here, again, there's visual signs, at least I can tell here. I'm not sure if it comes up on the camera, that this is where the feedings are happening. There's like nice small castings, a little bit of extra moisture visible. So let's start pushing stuff aside here. So if I find anything, I'll just set it aside. Appears to be that bin that's really full of mango seeds. Some cut in half, some not. This was the one that I believe I finally cracked open last week for the first time. Definitely a nice moisture level in these bins. Usually in the summertime, with all the heat, you would expect the bins to evaporate more and dry out. But I think it might have something to do with the higher humidity in the air. So even though you would think from the warmth the moisture is going to leave the bins, it actually seems to stay put even more. Maybe because of the high moisture content of the air. It just makes evaporation that much more difficult. Some of these, I don't know why, it's just so strange. Like there's like an outer dark surface that eventually seems to go away, and then there's this lighter appearance to the mango pits. Any other large chunks in here? I think I got the majority of them. Might stumble on a couple more here and there. So let's move as much of this aside as we can. Take these little fellas and put them up on the edge and create a nice big crevice in here so we can throw in a nice fresh feeding. But first we're going to use the remaining little bits of newspaper I have here as bedding, as well as some leaves. Should make for a really cozy environment for them. Really plentiful. Pretty much what we just gave the last bin, same amount for the most part as far as I can tell. That ought to do it. Take these older food bits and get them back in action. See how much coffee I have left. Not too much. We'll just dump it in here. Give them the rest of it. Start getting these worms piled right back on top of the feeding zone. Let them get back to work. Try to break up some of this clumpy material from the edge. Maybe even take a little peek over here, see how things are looking. The material looks really good. It's got nice moisture content. It's chock full of worms. Looks good. Alrighty. Well, I wasn't sure I was going to be in the mood for tending to my finishing tubs and moving the bait bombs out and feeding all these bins, and especially when I started encountering those mites, I thought I was really going to be a little bit in over my head, but yeah, here we are. We're at the finish line, and I think I'm still in good shape. I can handle it. Alright everyone, I'm going to go outside and go fetch that piece of paper that was covered in mites. I won't keep you around for that. I'm going to call it a day. So if you enjoyed the video, please remember, give it a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Consider signing up to be a subscriber of the channel as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Bye now.